Welcome to the People's Colloquy. Today we have something a little bit different, a Zoom question and answer session with Dr. Tsepo Mvulani Muloy. Tsepo, how are you doing today, brother?
Good morning. Good morning to your viewers too.
It's good to see you again. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it is. The pleasure is mine as well.
How have you been otherwise? Everything been good?
Hectic. Hectic. I think level one, all adjustments, on all fronts, academically, family-wise, and socially. So yeah, we've been hanging in there.
All right. Well, given all that, I'm going to get into the first question. We live in a time focused on productivity, and as a high achiever yourself, do you have any productivity hacks that you can share with the people?
Sure. This question is quite poignant, especially when we think about, COVID-19 and all the other challenges that it has come with, both for personal and professional relationships. So, personally, I think generally we're in an age where, our generation is getting to do so much more than the previous generations. And, you might think that you are overburdened, but wait until you hear the next person's problems and you realize that your schedule is nothing compared to so many other people out there. Right? And so for me, I think that, so predominantly I write, and I teach, and I lecture internationally. I'm involved with, the UNICEF University, which is headquartered in Greece, but they have a branch in Zambia, and I'm supervising PhD candidates from that campus, and I'm also lecturing an undergraduate course with John Moore Liverpool University in the UK, and so of course these things are virtual, so it kind of makes, in a lot of ways, it kind of makes your life a bit easier, but at the same time, the virtual experience can also be quite stressful, because you're not so sure where you are, with your audience, with your people and the like. So those are the two key things that keep me going, besides my own writing. And we're going to talk about it now because the topic of today's conversation is really linked to the project that I'm busy working with now, which is taking so much of my time. But in a nutshell, I think one is productive only when you take it a day at a time. There's just too much stress. So, and there's deadlines all over the show. So, so one needs to just learn. I take it a day at a time. What I can do for that day, I do. What I can't, I make peace with it. I wake up and I get back to it. So it's just a game of consistency for me.
No, I understand totally. All right. No, that makes a lot of sense. So just make sure that you get through everything that you want to get to the best that you can and not get too bogged down. But I think one of the difficulties of this time is that it's very difficult to switch off. Now in the time of COVID and people working remote, you'll find people who, it's a trend that began even before COVID, whereby if you've got your laptop and if you've got your phone and you're connecting, you're online, then you can potentially be called on to do some work. Unlike the past where things basically stood still when the lights went off or when you left the office. So now you have to find another way to balance that whole question of how much time should we actually be spending working, and at what point is productivity counterproductive in terms of, are you now just sitting in front of your computer just looking at it, but then the ideas aren't there because of the fatigue and all that comes with it. Now, when I'm online, I don't spend much time there without seeing an article or video talking about the imminent collapse of this country, whether it's based on colonial borders or tribalism or inequality or the general sort of enemy that the people are suffering through in the country. What is it exactly that holds South Africa together? And is that glue strong enough to keep it together through the current and coming challenges?
What is it that keeps South Africa together? Okay, so this is a very pregnant question at various levels.
Yeah.
Firstly, there is the whole question of South Africa, as in the origins of how we became South Africa. And so if I'm to ignore that, because that will take us a whole hour to discuss, and just basically interpret your question to mean modern day South Africa from 1910 to date.
Yeah.
We've not been kept together by much outside of political expediency and basically fear of the other, especially as drawn by racial lines. And so, because we're a product of colonization, South Africa is a product of colonization. So we basically always try to negotiate the space between the oppressor and the oppressed. The colonial master, which is the empire, in our case being Britain, and whether we like it or not, we must consider the superpower, which is America, and also ourselves being the colonized or the colony, right, which is South Africa. So what keeps us together is the relationship we keep between the interests of both of these two, the colony and the colonizer. And that we can unpack in detail, but that will take us another lecture. But we basically are in a time where our so-called public servants, plenipotentiaries, are having to grapple with how to keep the masters, because of the capitalist system, happy, and basically, the colonized in which they're governing, to keep them happy, because they need them to still vote for them, to keep them in power. And of course now we know with that comes patronage, comes nepotism, comes all sorts of corruption practices. But yeah, we really kept together by, it's even a joke to think that a constitution that we have, which is regarded as one of the best constitutions in the world, it's a joke to even think that keeps us together, because if anything, that document divides us enormously because of the class and the history and basically the national question. So, it's so many things. So if you go to court today and listen to any typical court case, you'd have to ask the question, we're in Africa, and the people and the rules that we are actually using are not instruments that are African. So can we then say that even this legal system keeps us together in the name of maintaining law and order? It's questionable. It's questionable. And even our ways of justice are questionable. So right now it's a mess. We're in what you call a colonial conundrum. And we're all just trying to negotiate and trying to make do with whatever we've got.
In a lot of countries that have got similar crises that we have, we've got a problem with water. We've got a problem with people not getting along the way that they need to in order to create a country that is going to move forward appropriately. Plus the whole, what I saw as not a very beautiful moment when the president was being kept from entering a certain place in KwaZulu during the funeral, and then he was kept from leaving and had to cut a hole through the fence. Now, all of these kind of things, is there any fear that we should be concerned about some kind of violence coming up at some point in the future? Because I think a lot of people, when they consider the crime and the inequality, then they'll think to themselves, what else is going to come down the road? Is that just an overblown fear, or is that something that people should really bear in mind?
Okay, so first and foremost, as victims of colonization, we, especially in the case of South Africa, because of apartheid, we are not in doubt that violence is part of our lives. It's so normal to us. It's not something that we can say we're going to fear in future, because violence happens every day in different contexts within our spaces. South Africa is a classic example in terms of geography of pitting the first world right next door to the third world. It doesn't matter where you are in South Africa. You can land at the airport in Cape Town, and just when you look right outside the airport, you're looking at Khayelitsha, you're looking at Langa, and yet you are driving to Yolani University of Cape Town on the hill, or some other suburb, or you're going to the CBD. So violence is always, it's in our context. It's just a matter of where, when, most probably people are anticipating genocide, a violence at that level.
Yeah.
Now, the example you are making about the president having to run away or be taken, that obviously is happening in the context of the burial of the Zulu king, and the Zulus feeling that the COVID-19 rules and regulations was just something that there's no ways they could stop them from saying farewell in the way that they felt as Zulus. They wanted to, in the name of their king. So here you have a clash of, you have a traditional leader and you have a modernist leader. So the king of the Zulus and the president of the country. So you had those tensions of, in Zululand or in KwaZulu-Natal, the king, is treated as more important than the president, okay? Because of tribal lines and tribal politics and the like, right? Mm. And so you had that going. But simultaneously also, it's a question of, did the president also understand that going into that kind of climate with the announcements he continues to make about social distancing, and everything in the book there was illegal. I mean, it was super spreader event, whichever way you want to look at it. And so he also was in a moment of contradiction, going to be present in a super spreader event that he announced as being illegal. Okay? So there's also those tensions. So of course, in decolonial literature, this is what you call modernity, right? These are basically cycles where, whether we like it or not, we will forever have to deal with that reality, because coloniality forces us to always have to confront it, because we are not in our system. We're still under the system of the colonizer. We're yet to actually live within the system that we, our forefathers, were actually, in fact, they didn't even build a system. They coexisted, without being under any one particular system, in the way that capitalist system has dictated our reality, ever since colonization.
So we did have a small chat about John Law. I don't know if you did check out that episode we uploaded, where we spoke about his history, being a gambler, being a person who was not seen as being of a high reputation around the people that he was with. But the thing that really struck me is that he was one person who managed to adjust so much of the world. Now, in South Africa, are we also waiting for a one person, or is there an effort that we can make together to try and address the issues around the capitalist system and how they are keeping us in place right now.
And anything that involves the global can never be done or expected to be done by an individual country. Okay, no country is an island. Every country operates under the banner of regional politics, and then that's at a local level. Under the banner of continental politics, that's at a continent-wide level, and under the banner of the international regulations, World Bank, United Nations, right? So we are no longer anymore at a time where we can expect a particular country in a particular geographic space to be able to come up with any solutions or change anything. We see now with America, having been number one for so many years since the Cold War, in terms of superiority of the capitalist system. But we see through that example that China, which is totally coming from a different system, though they say they're communist, but we know they've mastered the game of capitalism.
Yeah.
Now that they're actually a threat to America, and sitting possibly at being the number one country economically in the world. So what we see, what I'm trying to draw your attention to is South Africa should not try to play the game to punch above their weight. We've got petty partisan politics that are standing in our own way of our own progress locally. Until we actually, evolve from that, transcend those kind of challenges, only then can we then look clearer, at the broader picture and how we can actually become, powerful players. I mean, it's a joke to say South Africa is a hegemonic state in Africa. It's a hegemonic state in SADC. When you're to think about in the presidency of Ubaba, Jacob Zuma, we have been thrown right into the deep end of what is called typical African politics. Thabo Mbeki tried to hold the fort, and we were still looked at as, the most progressive nation in Africa, the most developed, number one economically. But with Jacob Zuma's term of office, here we lose to Nigeria, the so-called number one economic status in the continent. And secondly, our politics just goes straightly to be consistent with most of the majority governments in Africa. The level of corruption, the level of ministers that are rogue, the president himself becoming number one rogue figure. Okay, and so we are now sitting with commissions like the Zondo Commission. There were many other commissions before the Zondo Commission, but this is a classic example of how our own intra-politics is still keeping us scoring own goals instead of us strengthening ourselves, like Nyerere's time in Tanzania, where he came up with Ujamaa, and he was able to gather and galvanize the people to actually work towards a collective program based on their own cultural, ancestral, reference points. We are still yet to achieve such a thing in South Africa. I mean, with the constitution that says we've got 11 official languages, and yet it is blind to so many other languages that make up part of this people's country. And just so much. I mean, the bureaucracy, the kind of intellectual capacity we have in government today is just shocking. It's shocking. No institutional memory in terms of indigenous knowledge that we come from, and everything is done to tick boxes. So not much to look forward from that angle.
All right. So I forwarded you a message last night. My dad basically suggested that the 1976 Soweto uprisings are not meaningful any longer and that they won't be in the future as well. I have received more questions along the same lines when I told them what it is that we'll be chatting about. Another person who's saying that where's the meaningfulness in this? Why are those people mistaken? And why is it that people want to question whether or not such a pivotal occurrence is meaningful or not?
Okay, all right. So thank you very much for bringing us back to the theme of today, which is the 45th anniversary. Well, the way I termed it was towards the 45th anniversary of the 1976 student uprisings. Okay. Now, before I attend to the questions of your dad and other people that you're going to bring forth, let me first, just clarify to the listeners so that they are on the same page with us. Firstly, this year will mark the 45th year of the 1976 student uprisings. And because of this, I'm going to prepare 2 keynote lectures that are going to take place on the 1st of June and on the 8th of June. I'll explain the reasons for the 1st and the 8th. Both of them are going to take place in Naledi Hall in Soweto. Now, the reason for this is that it is felt that we're at a time when the story and especially the mainstream narrative of the student uprisings is wrongfully termed the June 16, 1976 student uprisings. Is wrongfully termed that, and this is why even in my topic or my heading that I give to you, I don't say June 16. I simply say the 45th anniversary of the 1976 uprisings. So there is no June 16. So what informs that is that I am going to give, and this is now talking to your initial remark from your dad and other listeners, the significance. What's the significance and why now? We've got other problems, COVID-19, etc. First and foremost, we are in a country that is very poor in terms of understanding its own history. That's the first. The second, we have relegated most of our duty to actually understand our past to basically the colonial writers. Okay? So these would be your scholars that have got nothing to do with us. Scholars in America, scholars in Britain, scholars from Europe who are interested in us as objects of study and not us as producers of knowledge. And so that's the second point of why I'm going into this exercise and why I'm going to give these 2 lectures. Thirdly, the story itself is going to reveal how we have landed at the hot potato of colonial education. And a lot of people start the 1976, June 16, 1976, they treat it as an event. They treat it as a day that happened randomly by students who were tired in Khatfo. And I'm going to show in the lectures, in the 2 lectures, that actually this is a longer story of the survival and the contact between black and white in the context of South Africa, particularly the Afrikaans and the rest of the so-called Bantus, as they termed us when they were in power from 1948. Now, the story begins not even, in the year 1976. The story goes way back, okay? Way back to 1910. In fact, we can go even earlier. We can go to 1652, which is nonsensical. Or we can go to the beginning of the 15th century, when we first made contact with the Portuguese, in what would later become Cape Town, and we would fight with them in 1510, and. But because of time, I'm going to just zone in from 1952 up until 1976. And I'm going to give a kaleidoscope of how the Esalen Commission, W.W. Esalen, was the white politician who was basically mandated by Dr. Verwoerd to be in charge of a committee that's going to look at the relations in terms of education of the so-called Bantu. And so the recommendations of his commission were that there must be Bantu education introduced for Bantus, and they were going to keep their education for the white people separate from the black people. Okay? And of course, this is consistent with the policy of apartheid, divide and rule. Okay? Never to mix, Group Areas Act. And so this is what you would see in the 50s going forward after 1952. And so I'm going to come and give you all the laws that they pass up until 1974. Up until 1974. And here now is where you can begin to talk about the brewing of the animosity that would now, be seen in the climax. If anything, 1976 is nothing more than the climax of what has been brewing since 1952. Okay?
Yeah.
And then I will that's the first lecture. The second lecture is going to now go into detail about from January 1976. And it will go right up until 3 days after the June 16 gig, because a lot of people in South Africa are very, 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 for some reason, they forget that the SABC was born in 1976. They launched in April 1976. The footage that meets the world with what happens on June 16 is footage that is selected by the apartheid regime who were controlling the SABC. And so, because we don't speak about these details, we only know what they wanted us to know. And they doctored and edited and kicked out everything that was not consistent with their apartheid policy. So, for example, there isn't a picture. They show you a picture of a young Hector Peterson that's been shot and is being carried by Umbuyisa, right? With Antoinette on his side. Minutes later, after that picture was taken, the same photographer, Ubabu Semunzim, would take a photo of a white man being stoned to death by students. That photo you've never seen. And that photo has never been revealed. Can you imagine if we had seen both at that very same moment? And when we talk, we speak to both. Right now, we only speak to this one, which shows us as victims, which shows us as people who are on the receiving end of bullets. But we don't talk about, but what about also the strength that was shown, the stones versus the bullets? Because these were students, these was no army, and they were fighting for what in 2015, 2016 is revisited as fees must fall, right? It's the same agenda. There's nothing new.
And we even see recently someone having been shot during the protests.
Right. And again, that person was not even a student and had nothing to do with the protest. But it just shows you how your earlier question of should we be afraid of violence that's coming? And therefore I answer you to say, but violence, we live in violence every day. You can just come with any example, but it just supports that, perhaps people are just waiting for what they refer to as what do they call it again? A civil war.
Yeah.
Right. But violence, especially to Black people, is something that is home to us. I mean, you can never walk in a township and think nothing is gonna happen to you. Whether they know you or they don't know you, you have to check yourself. There's just no-go zone areas, and so violence is just That's
definitely part of the disconnect in terms of the people within the country as well. There's certain people who have to fear actual violence and people who have a fear of violence, and even that is a disconnect between the different demographics of the country. The people who actually have to deal with violence daily are not armed. The people who are armed are the ones who have to deal with the fear of violence and not have it knocking on your door any given day, every given moment, when you're in a taxi, when you're on a bus, when you're on your way to work, when you're on your way home, on your way to the shops. It's a different kind of a violence and a different kind of a fear.
Right.
So yes, to outline, basically, there's so much more to the story that we don't know. And we need to dig deeper into the story to really get a feel for what the facts are and what the relevancy is and what the actual message that we can take away from the whole June uprisings in 1976. Now, that disconnect between what people think and the reality, how do we begin to break down that disconnect? Through education only, or is there more that we can do to make sure that the message goes out? Because there's still social media, there's still all sorts of different platforms that we can use to make sure that the knowledge is there. Is that being done enough right now?
Okay, so like we said in the beginning, we're now living in a time of, COVID has forced us to really get deeper and deeper into the trap of what is called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, right? Which is gradually becoming the Fifth Industrial Revolution, if Bill Gates has his way, and all the Silicon Valley kingpins have their way, with all the shortcomings that it's going to come with. But we're at a time where so many things are put up on social media, right? So many things are put up, and so information now is touch of a button. In fact, we've got an overflow of information, such that people are failing to keep up. Okay, but in terms of history, we still are lagging behind in terms of the narratives of knowing what happened in the past, so that we are stronger and more enlightened when we are talking about the problems of today, which is precisely the reason why, for the naysayers who say what's the relevance of talking about June 16, because for them it was an event, for them it was an incident. For them, they're not contextualizing it in the historical narrative of the struggles, which, by the way, did not end in 94 when we came to power. if anything, all that had happened was we inherited those problems, and then we chose the ones we wanted to address at the expense of those that we neglected to address. And I named them for you in our initial dialogue. When I said we've solved the political, but we've still neglected the other three, right?
Yeah.
Which was the educational, and the land, and the economic system. So, how do you really want to be an authority on today's solutions when you don't appreciate, or you refuse to appreciate, how we inherited some of the problems that we have to solve today? And why the 76 uprisings is even more important to us more than ever now is precisely because we are dealing with the youth. It's a youth story. And so it is to the youth that we are saying they're the most highly unemployed group in our population. It is to the youth that we look for solutions for tomorrow. It is to the youth that we expect that we're going to have hope, in looking into our future. Now, if you don't appreciate what the youth has already contributed, such as in the narrative that we're talking about with the 76 uprisings, whom today would be the people who are actually the adults who are in government at various levels, then I think you're actually running away from having a conversation that will actually make us ask the right questions and not the trivial ones. Because how do you explain somebody who was a victim of the uprisings, who today is sitting in seats of authority in government, and they have forgotten, what it was that they had to go through for them to be where they are today?
So
right? Why do you
learn the same lesson?
Right. So this amnesia, this denialism, right? This individualism of thinking for themselves at the expense of their agenda, which they're entrusted to realize, is really sick. It's. I mean, I'm going to talk in my second lecture on a school like the heritage schools in Soweto, the 8+1 heritage schools. And Naledi High, because I'm in Naledi, being the pivotal one, because I'm giving the lecture in the context of Naledi Hall, and Naledi High will just be behind me when I'm talking. And I will be having some of those guys that were present. I will be having them in the front row. And so it's going to be a moment where you have to ask yourself, how is it that government, arts and culture, Department of Higher Education, basic education, how is it that this has not been their champion? How is it that I'm doing this outside of their bracket? Right? It doesn't make sense. It boggles the mind. They have the budget. They have the historical memory. They've got the colonial wounds. But then this is not what they think is priority. So, of course, what they do is throw money at the problem. They've got the heritage roots. They've got a museum up in Jabavu. And all of this is, again, if you go into it, it's distorted contents. They say it all started at Morris Isaacson, total rubbish. It came from different parts of different schools, which today we are calling the heritage schools. But I will focus more on Naledi because really, I think the second lecture is what has Naledi's contribution been to the student uprisings, and I'm shocked actually because everyone speaks now about June 8, when Enos Guchana would get arrested. People think he was arrested. He wasn't. It was an attempted arrest. What actually happened was the students intervened on his behalf. They overturned the beetle of the police, and he was scrapped to safety somewhere in Tladi. And then there's a whole story after that But he eventually gets arrested only on the 14th. And what's ironic with this is that the day before, on the 13th, that's when all the schools came together at what is called the Donaldson Center in Orlando. And that's where they caucused to agree that it's all going down on the 16th, which was 3 days later. And yet Enos gets arrested the following day. The long and short of it is, I will go into details on all these things that I've just mentioned. And Enos will be present in the audience, because a lot of what we say, people will contest as to what's your evidence, where do you get those sources, so not only is it ridiculous that he's alive, he's actually going to be present when I give these two lectures.
Right, and the next question that I received from the book winner of the Angela Davis book, Rutongile Mashele. Does classism and internal conflict between Black people and students cause protests not to have the huge impact that they should?
Oh, definitely. I think that, the very idea of going to higher education, to university, that's whether you like it or not. You're in a country which defines people who are in the middle class as anybody that actually has a degree. So they don't care whether you are employed. They don't care whether at home, what your situation is. For as long as you are having a degree, you are in a country that says you belong to the middle class. So that's how ridiculous the class conversation is in our country, in our context.
I didn't know
again. That. Right. And again, you are in a country where, because of the different lines of expertise, so, your humanities students, your arts, your BA, those students are actually seen to be more active than the students in the economics and sciences when it comes to protests. So there's that tension again that exists, which is funny because the Faculty of Education and Law are interdisciplinary. They are social sciences, and they actually are going to be teaching students how to handle society and address societal matters. Yet they are the same people who are going to have to represent you in the court of law when you have been active and you've been arrested and all these things, right? So it just goes to show you how, I remember when we were doing Fees Must Fall, 2015, and in my campus, University of Johannesburg, Auckland Park campus, we had to struggle to get students who were doing accounting, the commerce subjects, to join the protests, because they were saying, guys, you guys. Yeah, you guys in politics and no, guys, we have exams. We need to we're dealing with numbers. We're not dealing with people. So continue, but leave us out of it. And so it just goes to show you. It shows you also as well how, our degrees also separate us. The way we think, the way we perceive our realities, our existence is really it. We've got some very fictitious borders amongst us.
You referred in the previous question about Bill Gates now and the fifth industrial revolution. I haven't heard much about that. When I thought about that, I thought maybe he's referring to the increasing element of states becoming security states. Is that what you're referring to, or are you referring to something different when it comes to Bill Gates? Because I know governments have naturally never really trusted their people. They've always had to find ways of either controlling them through materialism or militarism or repression. So what exactly were you referring to when you were saying the fifth industrial revolution and referring to Bill Gates?
So you know now that capitalist system dictates feasibility of any project.
Yeah. Okay.
So Bill Gates, through his foundation with his wife, you know, they have basically become most of the governments when you're talking health and being at the foremost end of breakthrough research when it comes to health. You know, they are really at the foremost because of the funding power that they enjoy. And so they are at the foremost end where cutting or breakthrough research, it goes through them.
Okay.
And then they are actually, and because of that, they become authorities on what exactly is going on. We're in a time where people are asking a lot of questions and not enough answers are coming back fast enough. And they sit in that privileged position. Of course, now he's also convinced who's the Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, because they also have a foundation that is also has taken interest in the in the health agenda. And of course, they say for them it's giving back. They're not making any profit out of it, you know, and they're giving all these scholarships away, you know, to get cutthroat research. But if you follow the history of the so-called industrial revolutions, so if we're saying the fourth and now we're leaning towards the fifth, you'll know that if anything, this has got everything to do with modernity. Okay? The first having been to do with the discovery of electricity and then how electricity would be advanced and through over time to achieve various things. And now with the fourth industrial, everything being online, the ways we're working, previous jobs, which could be done physically, now can be done by robots, and the like. So all that we're going to see now is a fast forwarding and an abnormal rate of replacing the old with the new, because we're going into the future. They're already talking about colonizing Mars.
Are they out of touch, or is it a matter of just that's how the future is going to look? And are they going to come across a lot of hurdles trying to pull that off, given that progress, in my view, it's something that is a promise that can't be kept? I mean, even if you look at something as basic as if you try to give every single human being a car, you've demolished the entire planet to try and achieve that. I mean, right now, you can only give cars to probably about 10% of the current population. It's not possible to make sure that everybody can have a car or have a car in their lifetime. Is progressivism bankrupt, or is that just a misreading?
So that's a very broad question. But in the context of what we're talking about now, in terms of the fourth industrial leaning towards the fifth industrial, you want to look at the boys, the big boys that we are talking about. You're looking at Bill Gates, you're looking at Elon Musk, you're looking at who's the CEO of Amazon again? What's his name? Okay.
Jeff Bezos.
Right. You look. So Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Elon Musk. Right. If you look at what is their common denominator, they are all obsessed with using their money to have all these extraterritorial dreams, right? And so when you say progressivism, it's like, imagine if you had the kind of money that they have, and your agenda is, if anything, it's legacy. You want to be known to have done something for humanity that, previously could not be achieved. And so they're at that level, right? And the rest of us are looking up at them and like, okay, and they can achieve what they want because they've got the economic power to do that. They don't need the government. They don't need any other person just because of their financial muscle, right? And so when you think in terms of that, it comes back to that capital question. Capitalism has become a god. Okay, it dictates who we will listen to and who we will ignore. Okay. So, which is what I'm saying. When you say progressivism, it's you who has the noble goals and everything. You are nothing but a theorist. But the one who's got the money, they are pragmatists. And so who do you think the world is going to go to? It's going to lean towards this guy that is going to be more pragmatic, and because they can realize it. Yeah. Whereas you'll be seen as talking philosophy. And that's not going to pay anybody's bills in any direction.
So I guess that does mean that they are very much out of touch with the reality, but that isn't something that's new to the elites of any given time frame. Now,
right.
We just accept that and say, well, we hope that they're going to guide us into something that's going to make sense. Or should we just try and focus on making sure that we can at least, in some sustainable way, could become a sole provider, making sure that you're able to grow the crops that you need to eat, because the people who have got the power to deal with that without any hesitation, without any problem, are interested in going to Mars.
Yeah, well, obviously, rule number one will always be survival. You've got to survive. You've got to make sure you can pay the bills. Your world needs to make sense. Your world needs to progress for you to be able to think about other things, right? So that's priority to anyone in any given time of history. And then after surviving, you could at least begin to start getting into a program where you say, in your little corner of the world, in your circle where you've got influence, like you're doing now with your YouTube videos, how can we contribute in a way that we are also participating towards a world that we would like to be in, a world we would like to leave behind for our kids and the future generations. So for me, that's how I choose to look at that. And of course, there is no one size fits all answer to that. It's all dependent on people's people's strengths and weaknesses and realities.
All right, then. Thank you so much for your time today, Tshepo. It was really good speaking to you. Very, very enlightening topics. I hope that we'll be able to come through to the event in Naledi that you're putting together and record ourselves as well as be there to witness what's actually going on there. What you're putting together is very, very important, and I agree wholeheartedly that the interrogating of the legacy of 1976 is critical to the future.